This is the Chris Stigall Show podcast.
Okay, guys, let's just rip. And Chris Stigall.
Chris Stigall. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight.
Chris Stigall.
I'm joined now by Chris Stigall.
Now, he puts the broad in broadband. It's Chris Stigall.
The Chris Stigall podcast is presented by usmedicalplan.com. Save big money monthly and get better health coverage at usmedicalplan.com.
Well, hey there, how you doing? Thanks a lot for downloading the Chris Stigall Show podcast. It means a ton to us that you leave 5-star reviews and written reviews, particularly if you're an Apple podcaster or a Spotify podcaster. You have the ability to do it on both venues in particular. So if you don't know where that is on Apple Podcasts, you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the menu of shows, and that's where you can write a review, which is awesome. If you could take the time to do it, I'd owe you one. Or at least leave a 5-star review. That helps immeasurably because people, as you know, that are looking for podcasts and new podcasts, your reviews, you suggesting this show, passing it along, means more than anything I can do. So thanks for your help there in spreading the good word, and thanks for subscribing so you never miss an episode. I'm away on vacation for a little bit with the family, but I didn't want to leave you hanging. So number one, I'd ask you to check out the Harumph Society because I am going to have some new posts there while away. Might even put up a few pictures and some thoughts. If some news breaks, that's where you'll find me, at the Harumph Society, okay? Meanwhile, today's show and every show while I'm away through 4th of July. We'll be back with brand new shows on July 5th. But this day and every day through the 4th of July, I have a whole spate of interviews that are brand new to this podcast audience. If you only listen to me on the podcast, then all of this content that you're going to be left with is brand new to you. Now, what other host goes on vacation and still leaves you with fresh content? Fantastic interviews that I think you're going to love. So sit back, relax, and enjoy these podcasts while I'm sitting back and relaxing with a cigar somewhere on a beach, I hope, if all goes well, as I record this today. Let me tell you about the guy that makes this show possible each and every day. A guy that I hope when you're listening, if you're thinking about trying to save money somewhere, who isn't these days, one of the most obvious places to cut is your health insurance. No, I don't mean get rid of your health insurance. I mean cut costs. I mean, have you shopped? Have you compared what John Ruhlman at usmedicalplan.com could do for you? John and his team have a network of 80 private health insurers all across the country. Give him a call and tell him if you buy health insurance for you, your business, people that you employ, if you are a self-insurer, single person, if you insure your family, you buy your own health insurance for kids and spouse, if you're a senior on a fixed income and you buy a supplemental plan for Medicare, all of those scenarios, John Ruhlman knows there are private sector health insurance plans out there that are way cheaper than the one you're using, I'll bet you, and can give you even better coverage. I personally have a friend that saved $2,000. I've had listeners that have written me and said, Chris, I saved a few hundred. One guy said I saved $1,000. I mean, a few hundred to $1,000 to maybe $2,000 a month for better coverage. And yes, it's always better. John's never going to leave you in a lurch where like you're with substandard care, all right? He's John Ruhlman. He's at usmedicalplan.com. I recorded a full conversation with him at chrisstigall.com so you can get a sense of who he is before you reach out if you'd like. But do give him a call. Tell him what kind of plan you have. Maybe Obamacare is the better way to go. He'll tell you that too. He wants to save you money just as much as I want you saving money, but always with good care, good coverage. All right, so 877-410-4321 or usmedicalplan.com. Read a fantastic piece at The Federalist, although The Federalist is chock-a-block full of everything. I've never read anything really bad at The Federalist, but when I read David Harsanyi's piece called Nothing to See Here But a Credible Whistleblower Accusing the President of Bribery, I was so glad that we were able to talk with him today. And David Harsanyi, welcome to the show. Thanks a lot for your time this afternoon.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
You say it this way, if I may read a bit. I don't typically like to read people's work back to them, but for people that haven't read the piece yet, almost a year ago you said former Trump White House advisor Peter Navarro was indicted and arrested by the FBI for ignoring a congressional subpoena. He was handcuffed and reportedly denied permission to make a phone call to a lawyer. Today it's the FBI that's ignoring subpoenas. There'll be no one to arrest Chris Wray, the FBI director. So there will be no more sanctimonious speeches or grandstanding from Democrats regarding the sacred need for transparency or separation of powers. Democracy is no longer in danger, apparently. Of course, we expect jaw-dropping hypocrisy from politicians. We expect a politicized Justice Department to protect Democrats. Nowadays, we also expect the complete abdication of journalistic responsibility from a partisan big media, and that is a massive problem. It's also why, David, I would just add, and this is my 2 cents, you don't have to agree or disagree, but that hypocrisy, that stunning hypocrisy in the way that the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, and so many of his associates were treated versus what we're seeing and living through right now, I think that's why that bond with Trump's base of support just won't be broken. And that is not a knock on any of the other Republicans in the field. I just don't know how they can penetrate the loyalty that many millions feel that this guy is being persecuted. And this is a two-tiered system of justice.
That's certainly part of it, but from my perspective, that may be true. But from my perspective, and I guess that the FBI sort of surrendered a bit, so the subpoena is gone. I guess Republicans were allowed to see the document. I think it was called a 1023 or whatever about the bribery charges and notes. But from my perspective, just from the the media perspective or the writing perspective, is that how could journalists not want to see a document that accuses the president of taking a bribe? Honestly, my problem has never been that the media has been tough on Trump. It's that they're only tough on people like Trump. They're, if they acted this way with anyone who was in power, and they were just the loyal opposition, the people who wanted to figure out the facts, or to catch those in power, in some sort of chicanery, duplicity, whatever, I would not care. But it's not. It's aimed at people, and especially it was at Trump because there was just this real hatred for him. But Republicans in general are the only people who have to be treated that way by the media, and the others they just protect. They protect Biden.
I don't know what you're hearing. It seems like I was kind of seeing out of the corner of my eye some news today that suggests, I think even Fox was reporting, maybe, again, it was on mute, so I just saw the screen, said something to suggest that the report doesn't show what some Republicans claimed it showed. I don't know who the source was on that. Apparently this document has been distributed to multiple lawmakers now, both Democrat and Republican. I don't, do you know anything more? Have you heard? I guess people are literally just going through it right now.
Well, that's one of the problems, right? Because I saw a source say that it didn't say what Republicans had claimed, but I don't really trust those sources because they lied throughout the Russia collusion stuff. They lied about other things, including Kavanaugh investigation, et cetera. So I have no reason to trust them. I think, from what I gather, we know most of this. Like, we know that that Hunter Biden was involved with this company in Ukraine. We know that he made a lot of money there. We know that the vice president at the time pushed to fire a prosecutor who was investigating them. What we don't know is where the money went, if someone was paid, if it was just a Biden family business thing and we're just talking about the big man. All of that's already out there. So I have to be honest, when I first heard reports of what they saw, it seemed very familiar to me. I'm not sure there's anything there that is going to, blow people's minds.
David Harsanyi has written a piece at The Federalist called Nothing to See Here, but a credible whistleblower accusing the president of bribery. Yeah, whistleblowers used to be the most patriotic thing that could happen when Donald Trump was still in office, right? I mean, we were about to make a statue out of, what's that guy, Alexander Vindman, right?
Right. I mean, can you just imagine if this kind of document had existed in 2019 aimed at Trump? I mean, it would have been, and it's getting boring constantly saying, can you imagine if it happened that way? Which, and it's not, if it were DeSantis, if any Republican, it would have been a massive, massive story. And now it's just like, no, it's not really that important. These documents aren't that important, just defending him, trying to diminish the importance of this story. And what they should be doing is trying to either debunk it or prove it, but figure out what banks, what shell corporations did Hunter use. I mean, there's so little reporting on it. It's very difficult. You need a lot of money and a lot of access to get to those sort of things. So for conservative outlets, it's very difficult to do any of that kind of reporting.
Biden wrapped up his joint press conference today with the Prime Minister of the UK. Last words he says as he walks away from the podium is, "I'm honest." And I thought, oh, well, then I guess it's settled.
Yeah. That's sort of his story, right? I mean, it's part of his like fantasy world where he hasn't changed his position on everything. He hasn't lied about his life constantly, just for starters.
Yeah. Here's sincerely, and I know this is not necessarily meant to be a political analysis segment, but I earnestly don't understand how, if in fact these indictments, this single indictment or multiple indictments are coming, as some are alleging, to Trump soon, courtesy of this Jack Smith character, over documents in particular. I don't understand how you make the case to the American people. I know you're talking about a jury in a court of law, and it doesn't really matter what the American people say necessarily. You could make that argument. But from a political point of view, if you really want to take Trump down or take him out, it seems almost impossible to have a president like Biden who has done quite literally the same things and then some, and the Hunter Biden thing hanging around his neck on top of it. Just from a PR point of view, like the American public, if you're at all fair-minded, you say, look, at worst, this is a jump ball between these two men. And one is being, run out of town on a rail, and the other one's being left alone. If any fair-minded American is watching this, I don't know how you don't reach that conclusion.
On the classified document stuff, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even think it's a jump ball. I think what Biden did, if the reports are correct, that he's had documents from his Senate years and his vice presidential years, he does not have the power to declassify anything. He should never have had that stuff. We don't even really know what kind of documents he has at the University of Delaware. I mean, yeah, again, like you said, not from a legal standpoint, but just from a public perception standpoint. I don't see how they can do that. And if they do, I think that's just going to bolster Trump probably.
Do you have any sense if, in fact, there are indictments coming? Is there much discussion amongst your colleagues about what that looks like? We've never seen that before. Andy McCarthy has reminded me before, there's nothing in the Constitution that prohibits a guy who's been indicted. Never mind, a jury, rules against him. Nothing prohibits him from running for president. That would certainly be a bizarre place for this country to be, but it may well be where we're going. I'm trying to process what that even looks like. I've yet to hear anybody really be able to tell me what they think that could mean or what that looks like if, in fact, it happens. Have you thought much about it or talked to anybody about it?
Everything surrounding Donald Trump's run and improbable initial run and everything has been kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
I would say he's a very unique character and everything that's happened. So, yeah, I mean, I would put it this way. You mentioned Biden and how basically unfair Americans or many Americans will see this as. But think about this. Hillary Clinton should have probably been indicted when she was running for president for having classified documents on a server. They keep saying, oh, well, they cooperated, Biden's cooperated, Hillary cooperated, and Trump hasn't. Well, listen, the law is governing that sort of thing. Don't say that, you're not guilty if you cooperate or if you have good intentions, that's fine. It says you can't mishandle these documents. And Hillary certainly did, and Biden certainly did, and maybe, I don't know if Trump did or not, honestly. Probably he did, but he was president. But certain people get indicted and certain people don't, and that's a big problem.
What about Bill Barr's role in this? You do write a little about in your piece about Attorney General Bill Barr, who spoke with the Federalist, said the investigation has never been closed. He's sort of a curious figure to me. He's not afraid to rap Trump's knuckles in interviews, but then he will kind of surprise you and turn around and say he thinks there's dirt on Biden too. So what do you make of that guy and his role in this, if any?
Well, I kind of like the guy because I feel like whether you disagree with some of the political takes or whatever, I think he's an honest person and he's just saying it like he sees it. And yesterday in the Federalist, we reported that the Democrats have basically been lying about that 1023. That they had said that it had been squared away, that there was nothing there, that the investigation had been closed. And Bill Barr's like, that's not true, because it wasn't true, and others have walked it back. So I don't know. I've always sort of liked him as a personality. I don't know, I don't think he did a particularly great job, but overall, I just like him. I like his book. I just find him an interesting character.
I still just find it fascinating that guys like James Comey still to this day, I mean, as of late last week or early this week, we're going around TV selling another damn book. And that reprobate number 2 guy underneath them that's still on CNN getting paid to do, Andrew McCabe. These guys, they're paid pundit people with straight faces. And they have been totally discredited, in my view, as lawbreakers, or certainly unethical at a bare minimum. And and media holds them up as exemplary figures that should have standing to comment on legal matters surrounding the president.
And how about John Brennan, whose CIA spied on the Senate, who knew that there was no collusion but lied on TV anyway? I mean, that's a big problem that these characters who and what's the guy's name? His name's escaping me. Who lied to the American people about not spying on them many years ago is on there too. So. Yeah, I mean, this is why people don't trust institutions, and then they don't trust the people who put these leaders who lied to them on television. And they shouldn't. It's a sad thing because you never know who to trust now, and that leads to a big vacuum of trust and conspiracy theories and all kinds of things. But what are people supposed to do? I don't know.
Well, the Federalist is a place.
Trust.
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, I do trust what I read at the Federalist sincerely. I'm not just blowing smoke. I really do love the work there, and everybody who writes is solid as a rock. I think David Harsanyi is evidence of it. Nothing to see here but a credible whistleblower accusing the president of bribery is his latest read there. David, I appreciate your time today. Thanks so much. Okay, let me tell you, MyPillow has been absolutely outstanding to sleep on these last few weeks. The new MyPillow 2.0, I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I sleep like a baby. Between the Giza Dream Sheets I'm sleeping on, the MyPillow body pillow that I keep tucked in between my knees and on my arm every night, between that and the MyPillow 2.0, this brilliant new pillow with the heat-dissipating fabric that keeps the pillow smooth and cool to the touch the whole night, tremendous. I love it. Even Dean now loves his MyPillow dog bed so much, he spends most of his time sleeping on it in the office. You go to MyPillow.com today, and you use my name, Chris Podcast. That's the promo code, Chris Podcast. When you do that, you save up to 66% on everything on the website, whether it's the slippers or the towels or the pillows or the anything. But on the pillow specifically, the MyPillow 2.0, you'll get a free MyPillow 2.0 when you order one if you use my name, Chris Podcast, as the promo code. So you can call them, you can go online. Either way, use the name Chris Podcast, and know this, that everything you buy at MyPillow.com comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. These are American-made products, every bit of it, American-made. And they are proud of what they stand behind as a product, and I can tell you they're really well-made quality products. So look, are they the cheapest products? Of course they're not. People get mad sometimes because they think the price point is a little higher. I understand. I mean, no pressure. I'm not telling you got to go buy it, but I'm just telling you, you get what you pay for. So MyPillow products are really high quality, and they're made here in the country, and they're guaranteed to last. So, you can buy something cheaper that'll fall apart on you, and you'll have to buy it again and spend equal amounts of money, or buy a really quality American-made product right now at MyPillow.com and save using my name, Chris Podcast, or call MyPillow today if you'd rather. 800-932-5056. 800-932-5056. Supreme Court, it's June, and that means Supreme Court starts getting active. And there's all kinds of Supreme Court onlookers, and usually the breaking news gong happens as the Supreme Court renders decisions on various issues. Today was the issue of Alabama and their congressional map. And what I guess some people are reading as a surprise, as Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh sided with what's considered the left of the court in striking down Alabama's current congressional map. Here to discuss it, help us make sense of it, is Jim Burling. He's the Vice President of Legal Affairs for the Pacific Legal Foundation. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you on. Hello.
Hey, it's nice to be with you.
I guess let's just start from the beginning. Can you tell us what this was before the court? What were they trying to decide?
So what was going on in Alabama is that for many, many years, they have 7 congressional districts. 27% of Alabama is African American. However, only one of the 7 districts had a African American majority. So they had basically one district, or 1/7 or 14%, which is about half they would have had proportionally by population. That was the way things were for many years. Now, the issue came up with there's a voting activist sued, and they argued that we should have another African American majority district to better represent the population. And Alabama said, no, we are creating these districts in a race neutral way. And if we are going to take race into account in coming up with our districts more than we already have, pursuant to a prior court order years ago, then we would be violating the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And we think that we should be able to create districts that don't intentionally discriminate, but if we're off by a little bit, just the way we try to draw compact districts and things of that nature, then that should be considered to be legal. And so a district court last year struck down Alabama's districting, saying that you have to have at least one more African American majority district. But then the Supreme Court immediately stayed that case, said, no, we're not going to let that go into effect until the full court hears it after a full hearing, et cetera, et cetera. And they had oral argument on it late last year. And now today it came out with a decision, and it surprised a lot of people because Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh, along with the usual liberals, ruled that the state of Alabama was violating the Voting Rights Act, and that it should have embraced the idea of coming up with a districting system or redistricting that had two African American majority districts instead of one. And so it was a big surprise because people were not expecting Roberts and or Kavanaugh to hold that way.
And is that because, forgive my ignorance, you can speak to it for sure, Jim Burling, most people would assume that conservatives believe that states and state legislatures, this is their purview, and they set the rules, and the federal government typically doesn't get involved. Challenges to the state legislature, duly elected representatives of the people of a particular state, they have that discretion. Isn't that traditionally the way originalists would view this, or no?
Indeed, that's right. And in prior voting rights cases in the past few years, Justice Roberts has struck down provisions of the Voting Rights Act because they were not race neutral. They were consciously discriminatory in some ways, or they were obsolete. These are statutes that were over 50 years old, and times have changed since then as far as the country's racial makeup and as far as the overt discrimination that occurred in a number of southern states. Indeed, the decision today was based on a 37-year-old precedent called Gingles, which set out this standards that you look to see if there's if you can have a voting district that's geographically compact, whether a minority population is politically cohesive, meaning do most African Americans vote Democrat? Is what that basically comes down to. The answer here was yes. And do whites somehow comprise a voting bloc, whereas a majority will vote for a particular party, such as Republican Party? And the court looked at this 37-year-old precedent and said, well, we have to follow that precedent. We're not going to overturn it. And we're going to find that the state of Alabama needs to have basically the federal courts strike down its voting rights redistricting because it doesn't provide enough African American majority districts. So you're right. It is surprising because traditionally the Roberts Court has given more leeway to the states, including in some of their prior Voting Rights Act cases.
Well,
here the court didn't.
Yeah, I can tell you, Jim. I mean, I know it's not totally analogous. Maybe we're not talking apples to apples here, but you look at the concerns over the way redistricting has happened in places like Pennsylvania, something I know well, and the court has been loath to get involved at all. They haven't weighed in when the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania overturns this, overturns that, redraws boundaries, rejiggers the rules for elections. People have petitioned the Supreme Court on this time and again in Pennsylvania, and the Supreme Court continues to say, we'll pass. That's your guys' problem in Pennsylvania. That's what makes this so confusing to me in Alabama.
Yeah, and there's a prior decision dealing with school discrimination where Justice Roberts wrote, the only way to stop discrimination is to stop discriminating.
Yeah.
And here they seem to say, well, we're not really discriminating, but we just have to draw districts in a way that have the result that we think is more appropriate. So it could be that Justice Roberts is worried about the controversy of the court. The court has received a lot of opposition from the liberal side in recent years, starting with Dobbs and looking at some of the other cases. And maybe he's holding fire. He doesn't think this case is that important compared to, say, the Harvard school discrimination case, where we're expecting a decision anytime in the next few weeks. So it's hard to know what motivates him. He seems to be, in some ways, politically animated by the reputation of the court and how that could be affected.
Well, see Obamacare for more, right? Ruling it as a tax. And it makes me wonder then, how will he behave? Do you suppose, Jim Burling, were you to guess, when we talk about the student loan forgiveness plan? I pray this court does not see any constitutional way to allow an executive branch to just waive debt off the books without Congress involved. I pray, but I don't know anymore.
It's hard to say. I mean, the justification for the student loan relief, as you know, is based on a post 9/11 statute allowing, that was designed to have people serving overseas in Afghanistan some relief from paying student loans, a kind of emergency, but the language wasn't written that carefully. And so President Biden decided that, well, this is an emergency, COVID's an emergency, and student loan debts are an emergency, and therefore I have the power to waive that. Now, I think that the Supreme Court is going to strike that down, even with Roberts playing man in the middle in some of these cases. That, to me, seems to be a bridge too far. Again, we'll know in a few weeks.
And I don't mean to stick you in a weird spot if you can't speak to all of these. I've just got a few legal cases in front of me that if you want to defer because you haven't been prepped on them, I understand. I don't mean to throw them at you, but there's some interesting stories in front of me that I thought, while I have you, I wanted to pick your brain. I'll start with the biggest one, Jim Burling, and that's Donald Trump. It seems people are saying that another indictment could come tomorrow. It seems there's a lot of animated reporting today that a big DOJ announcement is going to come tomorrow, and most people expect that that'll be an indictment. Let's walk through, let's just worst case scenario it for Donald Trump. He's indicted. A jury ends up finding him guilty of these things. He will appeal. This would go on for presumably years, wouldn't it? I mean, I'm trying to kind of walk out what this ultimately looks like, and could it be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court? And then what does that look like? I'm kind of trying to get to an end point rather than get caught up in the day's news of an indictment. Like, where could it go, and how do you see it?
You know, that's a interesting approach, looking at it in the long haul, because I kind of suspect that some of the prosecutors here are not looking at the long-term consequences of what happens if you have a criminal case pending against a presidential candidate or even a sitting president. How would that play out? Could the president give himself a pardon? Nobody knows, because we've never been in this situation before. How would this affect a president's ability to run the country while he's facing criminal charges in various places? Would they put everything on pause until the presidency is over? That's a possibility as well. Would the prosecutors themselves get fired by a new attorney general that the president appoints and have the cases dropped? That's another possibility. It's a real Donnybrook, and when you have a former president being criminally charged, it makes us look a lot like third world countries. No, I'm not opining on the seriousness of the allegations against the president that may be leveled against him, but I am saying that it does concern me that it looks like some of these third world countries, you have a strong man that gets tossed out, and the first thing is that the successor will bring charges against the predecessor. Are we devolving into that kind of situation where you better watch out? I mean, there were cries of lock up Hillary when Trump was running the first time, and he didn't succumb to that temptation. There are people that are saying that the Biden should be indicted. So, where is this going to end up and where is it going to go? I don't know, but to me, it's troubling.
Jim Burling with Pacific Legal Foundation. Two more questions for you just briefly, and one involves New York, one involves Illinois. They're just interesting stories to me. My jaw hit the floor, Jim. I don't know if you've even heard this. On Tuesday of this week, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, signed a bill into law that would limit lawsuits challenging the state constitution to be brought in only 2 counties of the state. That's Cook County, where Chicago is, or Sangamon County, where Springfield is, the capital. So there are rural representatives in Illinois that said, this is outrageous. I live closer to Atlanta or the capital of Tennessee than I do Chicago or Springfield, and I have to travel at great burden to me if I want to challenge the government. Where would something like this go? I'm stunned. The governor just said you can't challenge me or this government of Illinois unless you come to me in our county. That's unbelievable, is it not?
Yeah, it is stunning, because the idea that if you are a rural person that wants to bring a constitutional challenge to a Illinois state statute, you can only bring that in Cook County, or where the capital of Springfield is, where you have such a undiverse judiciary, if you will, that's biased in a particular way. I mean, it's a transparent way to shut down conservative challenges. And the first challenge for this is going to have to be in the Illinois Supreme Court. We'll see what they say about it. And after that, I could see a potential case being filed in federal courts saying that this is it's hard to say what theory it'll be under yet. It could be a denial of a Republican form of government, could be a due process challenge. But nevertheless, it is stunning politically to be so brazen about, hey, we're going to shut down all conservative challenges, constitutional challenges, and so you can only bring them in very liberal counties.
Yeah,
it is rather astonishing.
That shows a lot of chutzpah, for want of a better term. That guy clearly thinks he can do whatever he wants, unabated. J.D. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois. And then this last one, New York City suing New York counties for not taking migrants. The Democrat mayor of New York, Eric Adams, this week announced that the city is suing 30 counties in the state over their issuance of orders seeking to stop New York City from sending excess illegal migrants to their territories. It's interesting to me, a city suing surrounding counties in the state. Where could that go, if anywhere?
Coming from the West Coast, I'm somewhat bemused by New Yorkers fighting amongst themselves. But the fact is that New York, what is legal basis for doing that? It befuddles me a little bit. Again, is this because Adams is trying to make political points, or does he think he actually has a legal case to require these counties to accept the migrants? I don't know exactly what they're thinking, but it does make for great political theater.
Yeah, it really does. Jim Burling, great analysis. Thanks for playing fast and loose with me today on multiple news stories. He's the Vice President of Legal Affairs for the Pacific Legal Foundation. Thanks a lot for your time. Our pal Steve Moore was one of the individuals who testified yesterday on ESG. Environmental Social Governance. It's something that a lot of people are still trying to get their heads wrapped around exactly. There's a lot of different acronyms. DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. CRT, Critical Race Theory. ESG. These things get intermixed, but they are really all part of the same issue. All you need to understand about these 3-letter items, wherever you hear them, it is a Marxist playbook. It's leftists trying to get their way through institutions, financial, business, school, whatever it may be, without ever a law being passed out of Washington, D.C. or a state capital. Remember Larry Fink of BlackRock said very brazenly, very proudly on stage, I think he was sitting there with the guy that ran American Express, I think it was, and he was asked by this CNBC moderator, why aren't we seeing change fast enough in corporate America? Why aren't we seeing it diversify to our liking? Why aren't we seeing this? Why aren't we seeing that? Now, BlackRock, holding trillions of dollars, and investments and money for, large swaths of the country, he basically admitted, yeah, it's not moving fast enough, but we're going to get there. Take a listen. Actually, while we wait for that, give me Cori Bush from yesterday. Cori Bush from yesterday says if you object to woke, if you object to this stuff, you're basically a bigot. That's their word, and they get to say woke, and they get to say CRT. These are their words, and you're even having a discussion about it. Makes you a bigot and a racist. They're trying to control language. This is the running theme of the show. Take a listen.
When you say I'm anti-woke, when you talk about wokeness, you're saying I'm anti-black and I don't want black people to speak up for themselves. I don't want equality and justice for black folks. So I say to those that say wokeness, 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 we're anti-woke. This is not wokeness, what we talked about in here. And you should be on the side of folks who are woke because we're saying no more oppression against our community. So whatever else is being thrown around, unless you are saying I'm racist, white supremacist, and I'm bigoted, stop talking about wokeness. And you can't tell me that I'm wrong because I'm from the very movement where this came about. Don't let a fascist tell you what being woke means.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? The fascists are the ones defining the problem. She's not a fascist by telling you can't speak. You get it? This is gaslighting 101. You're the fascist for pointing out their agenda. You're the fascist for pointing out their agenda. You don't get to say woke. That's my word. You don't get to speak, fascist, says the fascist. All right, back to Larry Fink.
It's just, you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting. It is development, as Ken said.
How do you force change, though? I mean, Larry, BlackRock has really been in the forefront of the ESG movement within corporate governance and a real leader. And yet change is so slow. So what is, and Ken as well, how do you force change when it is so incremental and so gradual? How do you do something more radical? Have you thought about that? Has the board of American Express thought about more radical things we could do to enhance diversity and inclusion?
Because it has to be imbued in the culture of a firm. It has to be talked about. It has to be shown. Behaviors across the entire firm in every region have to be similar. And
have to be similar. I mean, it's unbelievable. That is the head of the largest investment firm in the world. Everyone must speak exactly the same. All companies must operate exactly the same, and we will force that to happen. So you can put all these three-letter things into the same basket. They're all related. They're brother, sister to one another. ESG, DEI, CRT. Mandy Gunasekara is with us. She's the former chief of staff for the Environmental Protection Agency. She is part of the Independent Women's Forum now, Center for Energy and Conservation at the Independent Women's Forum. She testified this week on ESG specifically. But I think, Mandy, I welcome you back to the show. You'd agree with me. This is all part and parcel of the same thing. I mean, you can pick any three-letter acronym you want. It's all part of the same thing. It's progressive politics, progressive agendas being pushed through institutions rather than legislatively. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Great to be back. And yeah, that is exactly right. That's because most of the policies being pushed under these three-letter acronyms are anti-American and ideas that the majority of the voters disagree with, which is why the leftists that now run portions of our institutions and the administration are trying to find ways to circumvent the democratic process, leave the voters out, and implement their progressive policies anyway that include dangerous things like net zero, forcing CRT training in governance and corporate governance, and then forcing people in the workplace to have to accept investments in things like transitioning children from one gender to the other and things along those lines. So it's very dangerous. Most Americans disagree with it. And that's why they make it purposefully convoluted, complex. And then when you raise these issues in Congress, you heard what Cori Bush did and a lot of the other Democrats. They just try to gaslight the American people and either pretend like we Republicans are just making something up or suggest that they are the ones trying to protect free markets or protect children. It's actually, it was a disgusting display of gaslighting, something I had never personally seen, but I saw it time and time again when we were testifying at the committee.
Yeah, you were one of the people who kind of went viral over the last 24 hours or so in an exchange over ESG. One of the Democrats on the panel challenged you very specifically like you were some sort of kook. I want to know, do you really believe this stuff? What are you, some kind of crazy? Do you really believe this? Like you'd made it up. But remember, I mean, and you know this very well from your time at the EPA, Jennifer Granholm is a perfect example of somebody who went on a television show but just a couple of months ago and chortled, "We're not coming after your gas stoves." Ha, 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 ha. That's ridiculous. No, we're not. Fast forward just literally a few weeks, and people like the esteemed Cori Bush again say, "Hey, we're not. It's not about your gas stove. We're trying to save you from yourself and make the air in your house and your apartment better." So yes, we are, but you know you're framing it incorrectly. They lie right to your face like it's not happening, and then tell you in just a couple of weeks' time, well, it is happening, but it's for your own good, and you don't know what you're talking about.
Right. That's the Marxist playbook 101. And then let's sprinkle in what you played just a little bit ago. We can't even talk about it in true terms.
Yeah.
That to me was the craziest part, where Cori Bush at the end wrapped up saying, well, you can't use the term woke. That's our word. And if you do, it means that you're a racist, bigot. And she went down the line and said a lot of isms, which just is not true. And I'll say this too, the hearing setup, it makes it difficult to respond because you're not supposed to talk unless specifically called upon. And so the Democrats use it as an opportunity to say a lot of rhetorical questions without actually directing anything at you to respond. So it's even when I was trying to respond in very short, succinct ways, I got gavelled down for speaking out of line, despite the things that they were lodging, not just at me and my other fellow witnesses there, Steve Moore and Jason Isaac, but anyone who believes and or seeks out the truth, especially when it comes to these dangerous policies like ESG that aren't just dangerous in the social aspect, but dangerous to retirees and pensioners, bottom line, which is what we were there to really talk about.
Yeah, and just for everybody's edification, because I know we still throw these acronyms around as though people know it. I know a lot of people still don't know it. What is ESG, if you could define it, Mandy? Yeah,
I would say it is couched as an investment strategy for good, but in its very essence, it replaces the traditional approach to investing to maximize value with implementing some social good or appeasing some certain stakeholder. Instead of doing what the shareholders want, it appeases what the stakeholders want. And so that, and the biggest problem, what we were exposing at the hearing, is that places like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, they control about $21 trillion of investment. Now, the majority of that are passive investors. So these are your 401ks, your pensioners, retirees, folks who make the investments, but they trust, they either give that responsibility to maximize profit. You as the retiree want the most bang for your buck that you worked hard for. You give that responsibility to a financial advisor. Often that financial advisor may already be part of a larger pool of investors, but all that ultimately ends up at a lot of it ends up at these investment houses that subscribe to ESG, which perform worse. There's study after study that shows ESG-themed funds, they perform worse compared to the Dow, compared to other funds. And so a lot of it is because they purposely divest from investing in fossil fuel investments, which tend to be the most profitable. And so at the end of the day, you have these financial advisors and firms that are using passive investor funds to gamble on woke politics, and they don't tell the retiree at the bottom of the financial food chain, what's actually going on. The retiree just sees 3, 5, 10 years down the road, they have less money in their retirement account than they thought they would, and they don't really know why. And it's because of these convoluted, complex investments trying to implement a woke agenda that set aside the value that should be created.
Mandy Gunasekara is with us. She's the former chief of staff at the EPA. She's now with the Independent Women's Forum as the director of the Center for Energy and Conservation. How can people, because I do get this question from time to time, we've talked with Steve Moore about this before, how do you think people as a consumer, as an investor, as you say, at kind of the bottom of the rung, we're not watching it. We throw our money into a 401k. We assume the people running it have our best interests and trying to maximize our profitability there. How do we better understand or get involved and not participate in this to the extent that we can? Do you have counsel on that or no?
Yeah, I mean, my husband just did it. He just transferred to a new job, and he had to go through setting up his 401k. And when you're doing it, it depends on how the process is. But for him, he when you pick what sort of funds you're affiliated with or you want to invest in, he went out of his way to pick one that he knew would not invest in ESG funds. So it takes a little bit of research, but if you have a financial advisor, tell the financial advisor, I do not want my funds being used for funds that ascribe to ESG. If you're picking and choosing, go online and you can change which funds that your retirement dollars are actually going to be, pool of funds are going to be affiliated with. If you have portions in companies, you can, as a voter, you can raise your representation through the corporate governance aspect as well. So I would just say the simplest way to think about it, though, is if you're the retiree and you're investing in a pension or you've got retirement funds set aside, just go in and either talk to the direct person you work with on how those funds are invested, or if you can go online and look at which funds it's affiliated with, do a little bit of research, and you can move that out of any funds that align with or ascribe to or incorporated into the ESG movement.
What's funny is all the Democrats' big headline talking points from this hearing, where you and people like our friend Steve brought facts. All the banner headlines from Democrats in this hearing are things like, you're stupid. You can't possibly believe this. This is all made up. This is a fiction. Ha ha ha. This kind of derisive, personal, childish attacks on you and the messenger's character. You notice that? They don't actually argue the points. They don't actually make a case that this is not real. They just laugh in your face and say, I can't believe this. This is stupid. You're a moron for believing it, which, of course, makes all of us highly suspicious. It's absolutely 100% true. It has the opposite effect. Yeah.
I agree. And the woman who, she's a representative from Vermont who went after me, that one of the clips that was going viral, she got upset when I pointed out the fact that the S under ESG, which stands for social, advocates for policies that promote transitioning children and their genders. And she was telling me how that just wasn't true. And I really, at the very end, I just said, walk into a Target. Have you seen a Budweiser can? With Dylan, I don't know his last name's face on it. Yeah. I mean, they want to say, don't believe your lying eyes to any of the Americans who understand what's going on and then want to raise the consequences of these type of policies to the people who have some say in the matter.
And then when they get caught and they finally have no choice but to own it, they say things like Cori Bush said, that's our word, you don't get to use it or you're a fascist, which is an interesting last line of defense. Just shut up, you don't get to talk.
Yeah, it's immensely disrespectful. I'll say that too. I mean, I was a former staffer. I used to help create and set up hearings like this, and there's no disrespect for the institution of which these people actually are in and represent. Yeah. And it's really degraded the quality and the ability to debate very serious issues because, like you said, the people who come in, if they disagree with you, it's not about facts because they can't argue on the facts. They just They rely on elementary level style tactics and try to attack your character.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying this morning. I don't mean to drag you into this, but I'll just say in closing, these people make me hate the institutions they are supposedly serving. They make me, I have an animus for them and their institutions. And as such, I find myself wanting to support people who will disrupt them. I don't mean physically. I don't mean violently. I just mean, that's what I was explaining. That's why I'm inclined to continue to be supportive of Donald Trump, because I know these people that I find so loathsome, loathe him so much. And as such, I just feel like, well, that's enough for me. If they hate him that much, that must mean he's doing something right, is sort of the way I feel about it. I mean, maybe that's overly simplistic, and I don't mean to drag you into politics that way, but anyhow.
I'm happy to go into it because I've worked at both institutions. I would say this, at least on Capitol Hill, the person's there by the vote. And so they can be cast out. The bigger problem is the deep state or the entrenched bureaucrat. I mean, they're just as crazy as what you saw on Capitol Hill, but they have no accountability to the voters. So they are even more empowered. So that's why, I agree with we need someone like President Trump again, who's willing to bust that cartel up.
Do you, may I just ask you, because you're in this a little bit, this news, I mean, there seem to be people, the fangs are dripping this time. They really think this Jack Smith looming indictment, this is going to be the one. I mean, the left is just convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt now they're going to get him in an orange jumpsuit and locked up behind bars. And maybe they will, I don't know, but I mean, this seems to be the one they think they've got this time. It's like, so. Go ahead.
Well, he's going to be president either way, is how I feel, taking my IWF. What they don't realize is, in the same way, I'm sure that the members of the Democrat committee walked out thinking like, oh, yeah, we just showed those witnesses. But what they really do is they expose how much they lie and how much they want to control speech and things along those lines. So trying to get President Trump in an orange jumpsuit, I mean, it just exposes to the extent the left will go to keep someone like President Trump, who is willing to restore America First mentality that so many people want, to the extent that they will go to try and prevent that from happening, which will only embolden the movement and make him president.
Mandy Gunasekara is the former chief of staff in the Trump administration's EPA, and now with the Independent Women's Forum. Delighted to see something yesterday, and I was really delighted they wanted to come to us and talk about it. Most of us here have been singularly obsessed on one issue, and that is, how do we turn what Democrats have done so effectively, like 50 days you can vote before Election Day in Pennsylvania, for instance. Early voting across the country now, weeks. As it was put to us once very well, Republicans typically vote for 12 hours. Democrats are voting for weeks in advance. How do Republicans overcome that? Well, the RNC has launched something called bankyourvote.com, and they wanted to come on and talk about it today. We were thrilled to have them. Drew McKissick, co-chair of the RNC. Drew, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. Appreciate you having me on and talking about something that's very important to all of us, no doubt.
This is the question that I get a lot. We ask aloud a lot rhetorically, and people have wondered what is the strategy going forward by the RNC to battle this weeks-long campaign of collecting ballots versus our day of campaign. So this is a start, I guess.
Sure, absolutely. Well, look, Democrats, as we all know, use the excuse of COVID to change voting laws in a lot of states all across the country, whether they did it legislatively, whether they did it by administrative fiat or judicial fiat. They tried to, as I would say, put forward what I call the buffet of how to make fraud easier in a lot of states, and that's what they did. Now, where we've been able to change some of those laws or tighten them up legislatively, where we have control of legislatures, we've done that. Where we've been able to file lawsuits and get things tightened up, we've done that. We continue to do that. But there are places where we're not going to be able to get changes made, where we don't control the legislature and the governor in various states. So what do we do? Well, if they've changed the rules and you can't change those rules back prior to Election Day, at the end of the day, you've got to win. Losers don't make policy. They don't call the guy who lost and ask him what the tax rates ought to be. That means we've got to turn out more votes than they do, and we have to win. How do we do that? Well, a big part of that is now early voting, whether it is early in-person voting early mail-in voting, mail-in absentee, whatever it may be, depending on what state you're standing in. This program, bankyourvote.com, is built around, number one, the principle that we have to bank as many pre-election day votes as possible. And two, we need to make it easy for people to understand how to do that in their specific state. So, whatever those rules may be. So when they go to bankyourvote.com and sign up, then they will be on a regular basis hit with information about how to vote early in their state. We had a lot of states in the last cycle where Republicans showed up on election day and, well, guess what? We have problems with the polling machines. There aren't enough and the line is long. Or we had to close this precinct down and combine it with another precinct across town. We ended up losing or leaving a lot of votes on the table on election day because of problems like that. So this is designed to get as many votes out early as we possibly can. Just to give you a few statistics, in the election last year, you had Republicans win in the early voting in at least 7 states, where we lost in mail-in voting. And the loss of mail-in voting was enough to lose the race. For instance, Arizona, Florida, we had one down there, Georgia, Nevada, West Virginia, we had places where that was the case. 3 Senate seats that we can point to, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, where we lost the mail-in voting by huge numbers. And at the end of the day, that cost us the United States Senate. So we have to get these votes in the bank early.
Drew McKissick is with us, co-chair of the RNC, brand new program called Bank Your Vote. You log on, give your information. You can get information in your respective state as to where you can vote ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Do you, Drew, I guess it's a 2-part question. Number one, I think it was Dick Morris, actually, who once said, no matter what you think of Dick Morris, I always thought one of the most interesting things he said recently to me was, hey, Chris, Republicans have their couch potatoes too. There's this attitude that only Democrats are out there to be found and encouraged to vote. And his point was there are lots of Republicans or people who would vote Republican that just need to have their door knocked on. You guys agree with that?
Absolutely. And that's another reason for this program, because the more votes you get from let's call it election day voters, the people who will crawl across broken glass to go vote, people who take it seriously, they know that it matters. The more of those votes that get in the bank early, the more time we have as a party and campaigns have to find the voters that you were just talking about. If they go vote, they're going to vote Republican, but you have to poke them with a sharp stick a couple of times to get them to turn out. Well, that takes manpower. That takes time. That takes a lot of phone calls, door knocks to actually get them to the polls. So, for us not to do this, for us not to try to push for more votes early, in a lot of these states is the equivalent of, bringing a knife to a gunfight. I mean, that's not advisable. If the rules have changed, you've got to play according to the rules in order to win.
Did Democrats know going into previous election days that they had amassed, I don't quite know the rules, and I guess it varies from state to state on what you can count and what numbers you're sitting on, but do you think they knew going in what they needed and then, or in many cases were waiting for election day turnout to see what they needed to? I mean, there's, as you know, I'm not dragging you into stuff we can't substantiate, but a lot of people suspect chain of custody with ballots has been a huge problem, rife with potential fraud. And there was sort of this, how many votes do we need? All right, let's go to the back and get them kind of a thing. That would also stave this off in the future if in fact that's what happened.
Well, I think, sometimes we attribute a little bit more, Machiavellian intelligence to our opponents than they deserve. Some of this stuff is just the fact that they're just working the rules that they've got. It's a raw turnout game. Elections are about math. They are about turning out more votes. So at the end of the day, if you don't have, number one, a big enough base of support, you're going to be in trouble. Now, most states, we've got a big enough base of support that if we turn out, we can win. If we don't, they'll win. And they're engaged in trying to turn out votes just as much as we are. They got more into the early voting quicker than we have because they've got a lot of, as Dick Morris would point out, a lot of the lazy people sitting at home too. They got to go get them to vote. Yep. It's a manpower intensive game, and it changes the way campaigns should be run in a lot of ways, where we're, I would say, less TV ad centric and more boots on the ground, knocking on the door centric. We need a merger, if you will, of the high tech and the low tech of campaigning. That's what we're looking at now and going forward, in my opinion.
There is an inundation of private money that comes flowing into campaign apparatuses on the left. I don't know if Republicans enjoy that groundswell of support. You know, your Mark Zuckerbergs, for instance, on the left. Do you see a lot of that private money coming into Republican efforts, or not really?
Not as much as you do on the left. You know, by a factor of maybe 2 or 3 times as much or more in some states, depending on where you are. Yes. Yeah. The question is, at some point, you reach a point of diminishing returns when it comes to money. There are only so many votes to go out there and chase, and so many hours in the day. You know, there was a U.S. Senate race we had in South Carolina back in 20 when Jamie Harrison, the head of the DNC, is running against Lindsey Graham for U.S. Senate. Democrats raised to spend $140 million in South Carolina in that race. The most they had ever spent otherwise in a statewide race in South Carolina was $6 million. So, I mean, it got so ridiculous at the end of the day that they were running TV ads on gas pumps, you know, I mean, because they just had more money than sense. You know, at the end of the day, a lot of that becomes white noise. And that brings you back to doing the fundamentals of paying people to get boots on the ground, to knock on the doors of targeted voters that we know if they go vote, they're going to vote for us. And it's just simple as that.
Drew McKissick with us, co-chair of the RNC. I've heard it said that, you know, the reason Democrats have it so much easier, too, is that they can go to a college campus and round up a bunch of ideological, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, kids, easily. There's a high concentration, like, you know, where you can go find a high concentration of new Democrat voters, that Republicans struggle because there's not such a place. They're more scattered. They're more rural. Is that true?
Well, I mean, to the extent that more liberals do tend to live in urban areas, yeah, you know, but we've got a lot of possibility out there, and we know where a lot of the folks who are more inclined to vote for us congregate. Let's take, for instance, churches. Churches in rural areas on Sunday mornings are full of people who, if they went to go vote today, are probably more likely to vote for a conservative versus a liberal. In states where ballot harvesting is legal and drop boxes are legal, say California, for instance. Now we're working in to getting conservative churches to actually be places where drop boxes can be placed and encouraging ballot harvesting in those areas. Why? Because it's legal in California. And if you don't do it, you're not going to win. So you may as well do it in the areas where you're likely to have more people who think like you do.
Well, listen, I'm delighted to hear about this program. So you go to bankyourvote.com, Drew, and one more time, if people go there, what will they learn? What can they do?
Well, so the first thing you do is go and sign up, and that will put you in a system of receiving regular updates as the election progresses of how, when, and where you can vote early, depending on what state you're in. Because again, the rules are different in every state. So this will be, a combined index of the laws in all 50 states that people will be able to access the info for their state and what the deadlines are and how and where they can do it. And then once they've done it, share it with other people, get them to do it too. And then also, they'll probably be, presented with opportunities to help with poll watching or poll working if they're interested in ballot security. All of this takes manpower, and the bottom line there, that's what it's all about.
Are we going to a model, in your view? Is the RNC going to a model, or are we getting to a place where election day becomes sort of this old relic
season.
It's season, and we're talking about boots on the ground efforts instead of focusing on turnout on election day? Is that where we're headed?
Yeah, it's turnout in election season now. And again, it's state specific. And the rules are going to be different in every state. And we can't have a one-size-fits-all model anymore. That's really where we are.
Drew, thanks for your update on this. We really appreciate it. Great to hear the effort at bankyourvote.com. Hope we can stay in touch. Came across a very interesting gentleman with a tremendous history and fantastic perspective. As we spoke yesterday on the show about the DOJ and the stories being lustfully written that the walls are closing in this time on Donald Trump. When I saw the resume of Thomas J. Baker, author of a book called The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy, I thought, boy, we should talk with him. He's a FBI agent formerly. He was on the scene during the Reagan attempted assassination so many years ago. So this guy's got an extensive background in the FBI, in our Justice Department, and we're honored to have him today. Mr. Baker, thanks for your time today. Hello.
Glad to be with you, Chris.
As you watch now with your storied background and your time invested in agencies like the FBI, as you look at it today, I assume retired today, what's your assessment? Where was it when you were there, and what is it today as you assess it?
Well, what has happened, and sadly, and I say this sadly, it's alarming in some respects for our country, but for people like me, it's sad that the FBI's culture has changed. And that was a deliberate decision initially made by Bob Mueller when he was director, Bob Mueller of the special counsel fame or infamy. And then it was made much worse by exacerbated by the poor leadership of James Comey. That's at the root of a lot of the problems. There's a cultural problem within the FBI today.
33 years you were in as an FBI special agent. I have heard it described to me as, I remember after 9/11, I remember people like George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld said it was a failure of our imagination. And there was the Homeland Security Department was created, and Tom Ridge became its first secretary. And I remember very vividly the first discussions about the FBI and the CIA not communicating and how they needed to work more closely together. And now it appears, this is not my judgment, but I heard someone say it, and it makes total sense to me, that the FBI has effectively become a wing of the CIA. They're now an intelligence operation instead of a policing organization, and there is a distinct difference. That's what the CIA used to be in charge of, yes?
Yes, that's correct, Chris. And it has certain dangers for American citizens, and also it's an unintended result of the September 11th Commission's recommendations. For instance, and we saw this at the beginning of Crossfire Hurricane, the investigation into the alleged collusion with the Donald Trump campaign with the Russians. The FBI then demonstrated again that any referral or any suggestion by the CIA they would act on, which that's indirectly a result of the recommendations of the September 11th Commission, whereas in the past they would have to establish themselves that there was enough predicate to initiate a counterintelligence investigation. Now a mere referral for the CIA satisfies that, and that was a finding too, and it was confirmed by the Department of Justice Inspector General when they looked at the shenanigans involved in the Russian collusion investigation.
The FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that seems to be, in recent American history, the most abused, most lied about, most misrepresented weapon used against the Trump administration. And so many officials who were on cable news today, former officials on cable news today, who flagrantly lied, and including, I would say, James Comey, misrepresenting what they knew to be false to obtain warrants to surveil fellow Americans. It just doesn't get more egregious than that. And yet, there they sit, selling books and talking like they're experts on the matter with hopeful pundits on cable news who want to see Donald Trump in a prison jumpsuit. It's just crazy, Mr. Baker.
Yes. Well, Pfizer is a specific thing. I've often said that the changes that have to come about, most of them have to begin in the Bureau and by the Bureau, by the FBI, to change culture. And the key thing in changing the culture is to recognize the problem. But as far as Pfizer goes, there's absolutely a role that Congress can play and should play in this. And for the benefit of I realize you're very familiar with these issues, but for the benefit of your audience, let me just say one thing. FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, was enacted in 1978 itself as a reform. And it set forth it established a secret court, the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, to enable the FBI in this country to gather intelligence from foreign agents who were resident within this country, because it also had been established by then, and in those reforms in 1978, that the CIA and the NSA were not to operate in the United States. So the original intention of FISA was to gather intelligence, not evidence, on foreign agents. What has happened after September 11th, the act has been modified and amended time and time again, and now FISA is being used and acknowledged being used against U.S. persons, American citizens. That's an abuse which Congress can stop.
Thomas Baker, author of the book called The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. I'll close by asking you this question, Mr. Baker, and that is, do you believe that the agency can be reformed? I've heard many people say no, it's too far gone, and it really has to be dissolved and rebuilt in some new forum. I don't know how you feel about that. What's your view?
My view is it has to be reformed. It has to return to its original culture. It still can have a counterintelligence mission, but an original culture of a swear-to-tell-the-truth law enforcement agency. That can happen. We have to be optimists, like Ronald Reagan was an optimist. I conclude my book by saying this. So we have to work and pray and keep talking about it and keep agitating to bring about these reforms.
And you think that comes primarily if you had it to wave a magic wand and direct that would come at the hands of Congress?
Well, Congress has a role, and they certainly can do it as regards Pfizer and other aspects of things. But essentially, it has to come from within the FBI, and it's challenging. But the effort is worth it because we're talking about helping to preserve the Bill of Rights, because that's essentially what's been abused in this whole process.
And is the role of an attorney general or a president important there? Who that next person is?
Absolutely. Both of them. They're key. I mean, Bill Barr was trying to do this, and he was bumping up against Wray on several fronts on this. And he has spoken very recently, Bill Barr has, in the same way I talk about it in my book, The Fall of the FBI, that Comey and Mueller threw the baby out with the bathwater in reaction to September 11th. And Bill Barr said that if we can get another attorney general like Bill Barr, and that requires getting a new president, which hopefully will happen in 2 years, with a new president, we can get a new attorney general, we can get a new director of the FBI, and then some things will happen. But I'm trying to do my part with this book, and I know you're doing a great job there bringing these kind of issues to people's attention, and I appreciate it, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. It's called The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. Thomas J. Baker. Thank you, sir, so much.
The Chris Stigall Show podcast.